Delighted to welcome you to our final webinar of this year, focused on addressing deforestation, advancing deforestation-free value chains. Thank you very much for joining us today and for taking the time to participate in what is promising to be a very timely and important conversation. My name is Cristina Larrea. I'm the Director of Agriculture, Food and Sustainability Initiatives at the International Institute for Sustainable Development. At this work stream, we work very closely with governments, businesses, as well as standard-setting organizations to reform and design and support the adoption of policies, standards, and corporate practices that advance more sustainable and inclusive value chains. Over the past years, we have engaged deeply on the challenge of deforestation, approaching from multiple angles. For instance, we have looked at how public policies, both domestic and trade-related, can help advance deforestation-free commodity production, including through the effective use of sustainability standards. More recently, our work has focused on unpacking due diligence and market access regulations such as the EUDR and supporting compliance through better alignment of sustainability standards and domestic policy measures. As we all know, deforestation is a global challenge, one that no single country, no single measure or actor can address alone. Collaboration is essential to ensure that implementation is effective, while also at the same time inclusive and fair. This means building on past efforts that have proven to be effective, while at the same time accelerating ambition and scaling positive impact. Business and global value chains play a critical role in addressing deforestation, particularly when we consider commodities that are produced in one side of the world and are consumed in another side, such as, for instance, soybean, palm oil, cocoa, or timber, which remain main drivers of tropical deforestation despite important progress over the past decade. The paper that we are launching today and today's discussion will focus on measures and tools that businesses as well as standard-setting bodies are putting in practice in order to address deforestation. We're going to look at their strengths, their innovation, as well as their potential for continuing improvement. We are extremely grateful for the diverse and high-level panel joining us today, and we thank you very much for them to be with us today. You will hear perspectives from policymakers and representatives from the European Union, global businesses and cocoa companies from the Global South that work very closely with the smallholder farmers, and public standard-setting bodies and international ones. The discussion promised to be very rich and dynamic, so we encourage you to remain actively engaged. We're going to have polls. We also invite you to formulate your question or your comment in the Q&A chat, and we're going to have a dedicated session for that. Before we continue, I would like to thank the government of Sweden for their continuous support behind all this work that we are doing. I would like also to warmly acknowledge my colleagues ISD, who have done a fantastic work putting this paper together and also engaging closely with businesses and value chain and sustainability standard setting bodies. Rupal Verma, leading author of this publication, supported by Florencia Sarmento and Erika Luna. Finally, I will just go through the agenda today before I pass the word to Rupal. Let's go to the agenda. Next slides. We're going to hear the main findings of the paper that we are launching today. It's going to be focused on measures that sustainability standards have put in practice, as well as measures that businesses have put in practice. We're going to hear the findings and main recommendations. And following that, we're going to have an interesting panel discussion with our guest speakers. Before that, we're going to open the floor for Q&A, so stay engaged. And we thank you in advance with your active engagement and active listening. Before further ado, I pass the word to my colleague Rupal, who's going to walk us through our findings of the paper that we are presenting today.
Thank you so much, Cristina. Can we move to the next slide, please? So I will briefly introduce what we plan to do with the Sustainable and Resilient Value Chain series and our objectives and methodology, and then move to the findings of voluntary sustainability standards, followed by my colleague who will help us go through the private sector findings. So to briefly mention, and of course, all of this can be found in much more detail in the report, which we share the link to towards the end of the presentation. The objective is to understand how deforestation is being addressed by private sector actors, how they can tackle deforestation in value chains and use tools like voluntary sustainability standards to achieve deforestation-free goals. I will talk about what VSS are for those of you who don't know in a minute. But before, for the analysis, very briefly, we did use the Sustainable Resilient Value Chains framework, which is upcoming in the next slide, to understand what standards are doing. We analyzed the standards requirements against each of the framework criteria, as you can see in the image on the right side of the slide, and benchmark those against the framework. So you can see the standards either covered the requirements, did not cover it, or were partially covering those. A similar exercise was adopted to understand private sector initiatives and then understand and engage with the VSS and the private sector representatives also, as Christina mentioned. Before I move to the framework, one thing also which I would like to say is, as you hear through the presentation, we of course have very nice positive results and promising efforts undertaken by both VSS and private sector, but we did not assess the effectiveness of these measures, which of course demands a separate research on its own. Moving on, next slide, please. Here you see what we will use in this, what we use in this report on deforestation, but also in all our upcoming Sustainable Resilient Value Chain series is the SRVC framework, which is divided into 4 main stages. The first one, as also on the screen you see, is plan, prepare. As the name suggests, it is preventative. So it is when before the risk happens. So in our case, before deforestation occurs. It is an anticipatory step used to identify and mitigate the risk. For example, companies conducting risk assessment across value chains and tiers to identify deforestation risk exposure. The second stage that you see here is respond, which is the measures that are happening immediately after the risk occurs. So it's a very timely reactive phase that companies or voluntary sustainability standards adopt. The third one that you see here is recover. Recover is the one which is a little bit more longer term. It is a restorative phase in which the focus is on ecological and social rehabilitation. For example, companies restoring areas where deforestation occurred using climate resilient species to support recovery. The last one, and of course, our most personal favorite, is adapt. Adapt stages cover the measures that can happen both before the risk occurs and after the risk occurs. So, before deforestation also and after deforestation also. The key thing to note is that this is a longer term transformative phase where solutions are aimed to build long term resilience and redesign systems. So an example for this would be any landscape approach that companies adopt or embody nature-based solutions. Also key to highlight here is that these measures are not mutually exclusive. What might happen in one phase of this framework can contribute to the other, and vice versa. But before I go, I know we have a very nice poll for you. So we test if you really grasped something out of this very quickly, Erica. Can we go to the next slide also?
Yes. Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself. But yeah, we have a question for the audience. Now that Rupal has shared with us the Sustainable and Resilient Value Chains framework, we want to ask you, which SRVC stage do you think is most promising to address deforestation and advance sustainable and resilient value chains? I'll just give you a couple seconds to respond to the poll. If you can just pick the one that you think is the most promising one. We have plan and prepare before deforestation occurs, respond right after deforestation occurs, recover, and then adapt. Maybe we can end the poll there and see the results. if these are the results, then it's plan, prepare, and adapt the two stages that people have selected the most. So we're gonna see next what we found.
Thank you so much, Erica. So as all of you pointed out, plan, prepare, and adapt really did come across as the strongest of the themes which can advance deforestation-free value chains. But let's move. Maybe can we share the results very quickly? Warren, once again, if we have them. We had 46%, I know, who voted for plan, prepare, 46% for adapt. Nobody voted for respond, which is disheartening because it's also important, even though it's not the strongest. And then I remember we had 13% for recover. So that's an overarching view. But Warren, if you can drop it in the chat, will also be very nice. So this is also in line with what we found out. Perhaps I will quickly now walk through what we found out in the report on the VSS side of things, followed up by the private sector. So for the voluntary sustainability standards, or VSS as we call them, for those of you who may not be very well aware, as the name suggests, they are voluntary in nature, but they have a considerable market share. For instance, in cocoa, about 32% of global cultivated cocoa area is certified. So for the analysis, we included 7 voluntary sustainability standards which operate in forest risk commodities. Those are the ones that you can see on the screen. But to give you an overview, we covered forestry, where we had FSC, we had PESC, and we had the regional standard from Africa. Then we covered coffee and cocoa via Rainforest Alliance and Fair Trade. We had a palm oil focused standard, which is a roundtable on sustainable palm oil. And for soy and other ag commodities, we included Proterra. Can we move to the next slide, please? I will now share with you very high level on what we found out in the VSS based on the requirements that these standards have. Of course, in more detail, all of this information can be accessed in our report. But for plan prepare, what we found out is that the preventative category is the strongest amongst most VSS. They have all of them included in the analysis, have requirements to restrict or prohibit the conversion of forests into production land. The second most important finding that we had is that all of these have cutoff dates, but they vary. For instance, in Rainforest Alliance, there's a very strict date with 2014. With FSC, there was 2020. The regional standard ARSO, for instance, lagged at all the cutoff date, even though they do prohibit forest conversion. So our finding here is definitely to have these cutoff dates very clearly enforced because they discourage new land conversion and at a minimum be aligned with what we know is now emerging also in the regulatory requirements like the EUDR. We also observed that a lot of voluntary sustainability standards are incorporating technology and high resolution maps. For example, Fair Trade and Rainforest Alliance have requirements for collecting geolocation data from all farmers. This is something that still needs to be mainstreamed across all VSS, and only a few of them are adopting that now. And on the sidelines, it also needs to be made sure that producers and smallholders can access these technologies to really make it effective to address and prevent deforestation. Last but not the least, in the prevent category, a very strong finding emerged also where all standards have some form of chain of custody, which is simply a model to ensure traceability of certified products to its origin. Can we click once so we see the next? Yes, the next category respond, which our audience also did not resonate with, is of course the one that is the most difficult because it's not in the VSS mandate as we just discussed. They already have cutoff dates, which in theory do not allow for any deforestation to happen. However, there might be some areas where leakage might occur and there still might be deforestation that occurs. Some standards do have provisions to respond to that kind of deforestation. RSPO, for instance, requires its members to have an assessment of high conservation value areas. That is an example. But the assessment here did identify that a lot of VSS have general audit requirements and general corrective action plans, which can really be made deforestation specific, especially for those VSS that operate in deforestation risk commodities. Next slide, please. The third category in our framework was recover, which are restorative measures. What we found out was that most VSS require producers to restore natural and degraded areas. Explicit reforestation as remedy, for instance, is present in forestry standards, all of the ones that we included in our analysis. They require sustainable timber harvesting practices followed by assisted or natural regeneration to restore productivity. Among the agricultural standards also, we found out that Proterra and RSPO have specific remediation and compensation measures in place. So that's all very promising to recover the degraded lands. And last but not the least, given the social element of deforestation, we also observed that a lot of VSS have general grievance redressal systems. However, those are the ones that could be really changed to be more deforestation specific for the ones operating in deforestation risk areas. The next category, please. The last category in our framework, adapt the measures that ensure long-term transformations. In all of the standards, we observe there's some form of motivation to have improved production systems, to have forest positive outcomes. Forestry standards encourage long-term management of forest. They also have requirements for forest management plans to improve forest health and also motivate production practices like silviculture. On the other hand, among ag standards, we are seeing a growing trend to have, sustainable agricultural practices embedded in their requirements. For instance, fair trade promotes agroecological practices in agroforestry. And these are the kind of nature-based solutions that can really support reducing the pressure to convert new forest lands into agricultural or production lands. And that's what needs to be embedded into most of the standards requirements. Next slide. Well, with that, we do finish already what standards embody in their requirements, in their standard requirements. But to go one step beyond that and to also appreciate a lot of the work that standards are doing beyond their specified requirements and on the ground, we also did analyze very briefly some of the promising practices that they are doing to promote deforestation-free value chains. The first one in the first category, plan prepare, which is also very promising, is that a lot of standards, as I was saying before, are leveraging technological solutions and satellite imagery. This they use to prevent deforestation, but also to detect early clearing, enable action, and avoid any future deforestation. An example for that will be Fairtrade, that is working with Satelligence to monitor all of its certified cocoa and coffee production areas. They collect the geolocation of all their plots of land based off on which they can detect any deforestation, flag any risks for deforestation, but also use this data to support farmers, gain market access by complying with various regulatory requirements that do demand this kind of data. The limitation, of course, as we were speaking before, with technology is to make this available to producers, to smallholders, so they can understand this data. The next promising one under prevention of deforestation that we found out is strengthening community forestry approaches. These are the ones where forestry approaches where local bodies are capacity building is happening at the local level, where local actors are encouraged to take ownership of the land, govern the land, manage and preserve the areas. An example of this is the Guatemala's Maya Biosphere Reserve, where government has granted local communities long-term forest concessions. FSC, for instance, is very active here, supporting the local actors getting these concessions. The same is the case for Rainforest Alliance. Under the next stage, which was respond, of course, as we spoke earlier, in theory, standards do not allow for deforestation. So there's not much of a need, or this reduces the need a lot to have any response or reactive measures beyond their audits and corrective action plans that they already have. Next stage in our framework was recover. Recover is the restorative phase. Just to reiterate, a very promising practice that emerged here was carbon-based forest landscape restoration approaches, the ones where voluntary carbon projects can finance site-level replanting and rehabilitation. An example of this is the work that is being done by Fairtrade, where they do try to sell these carbon credits to carbon markets of course, the challenge goes without saying, is to find this voluntary carbon market and also engage with the volatility in prices of these. And here I would like to point out that this kind of measure on forest landscape restoration, it does in the beginning cover recover measures, but as time progresses, its results are something that also do flow into adaptation. So this is where we see, these measures are not mutually exclusive. The last one, and I know I have been speaking for very long, so just hear me for one more minute, is our favorite, is the adapt, where a lot of actors are now having landscape approaches, which is just simply an approach which involves a lot of local actors, communities, international bodies, donor agencies, governments, NGOs, businesses that come together to solve this complex challenge of deforestation. A very nice example for this is RSPO, for instance. They are the ones implementing jurisdictional certificates in Indonesia, and they're not doing this alone. They're working with local governments, they're working with businesses like Unilever, so that, of course, there is certification, but there is also capacity building of farmers to protect their lands. With that, we finish with the voluntary side of things, and I now hand over to Florencia to continue with the private sector.
Thank you, Rupal. So moving on to the private sector, the next slide, please. Companies are also innovating and adopting various techniques to address deforestation, which we analyzed against the SRVC framework presented by Rupal earlier, based on some illustrative examples. So first, to begin with Plan Prepare, the first approach that we have identified is that companies are increasingly integrating advanced technology. One example is mapping supplier farm polygons and detecting deforestation risks via satellite imagery. So for instance, Cargill reports having applied polygon mapping across 15,300 cocoa farms in Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana, reporting 100% and 74% traceability respectively. Also, blockchain or mass balance tokens are being used to carry out origin attributes through mixing and keeping claims tied to source plots. Unilever, for example, piloted a blockchain tool in Indonesia for sourcing all palm fruit. And Looker, who is joining us today, has also carried out a pilot to integrate blockchain in their cocoa supply chains. Another approach taken in the Plan Prepare phase is providing financial incentives to promote sustainable agricultural practices among farmers. And one example among these incentives is the payment for ecosystem services. For example, under the Cocoa Forest Initiative Program, Ferrero enrolled more than 9,500 cocoa farmers in a PES scheme, providing them with financial incentives, trainings, tools, and fertilizers to support deforestation prevention and sustainable land use. Beyond the Plan Prepare phase, we also identified respond strategies that the private sector has implemented. And in this sense, the strengthening sourcing requirements and supplier engagement policies has become a central strategy. Companies, for instance, apply clear no deforestation, no pit, no exploitation rules, suspend non-compliant producers, and require time-bound recovery plans. And for example, Mondelez International uses satellite monitoring for its palm oil supply chains. And when a satellite detects deforestation, Mondelez starts a suspend and engage process for the mills that were present where the alert occurred. And the affected suppliers are then engaged to collaborate and fix the issue. Another key approach here under Respond has been to use audits. And a clear example of how audits can be used to respond to deforestation is found in Brazil's beef industry through the terms of adjustment of conduct, which is a legal settlement that requires slaughterhouses to audit cattle purchases to monitor and identify those suppliers that might be engaged or associated with illegal deforestation and exclude them. So for example, JBS, which is a major meat packet from Brazil, has reported that only 4% audited supply chains contain some sort of irregularity in 2022, compared to 52% among those that were not audited. Next slide, please. If we then move to recover, we find that private sector has also adopted some measures, and these measures typically involved identifying degraded areas, again using technology, and implementing restoration practices such as agroforestry. For example, Luque reports training Colombian farmers in agroforestry techniques, encouraging them to grow other crops such as bananas and fruit trees among their cocoa crops and native forest species. And lastly, to address deforestation in a more long-term way, private sector are increasingly adopting landscape interventions. An example of this approach is the one adopted in Brazil's Cerrado biome by Carrefour Foundation, Metro, Nestlé, and Conservation International, which are members of the Forest Positive Coalition, who is also joining us today. And there they supported a landscape initiative which promoted deforestation-free soy and beef production by helping the farmers adopt low carbon and deforestation-free, conversion-free agricultural practices. Next slide, please. Overall, in terms of our conclusions and recommendations, what we found, or what the report suggests, is that the plan, prepare, and adapt measures, as you have voted in the poll, may tackle deforestation more effectively than respond or recover, because there is more value in being proactive rather than reactive. And in terms of our findings and recommendations, first, for plan prepare, we found that this is the strongest and is improving very fast. But still, for VSS, we recommend requiring production farm geolocation, focus on deforestation hotspots, and set clear no conversion, no deforestation rule with credible cutoff dates. And for the private sector, in turn, we recommend also requiring production farm geolocation to improve the monitoring of deforestation, in particular in areas that are prone to it. Then second, for response, so for the more immediate actions, we find that these actions exist, but they are often generic, especially with VSS. Therefore, for VSS, what we recommend is specifying corrective action plans against deforestation, and for the private sector to strengthen the audits and action against no deforestation conversion sourcing policies. Next slide, please. No, sorry. Yes, next slide, please. For the recover part, we found that provisions to repair harm are present, but they can still be strengthened. So for instance, VSS could improve tracking of measures implemented and strengthen the grievance mechanisms and include provisions on deforestation. And for the private sector, they could make sure that the solutions for recovery are supported with socioeconomic benefits for producers. And lastly, for the more long-term transformation for ADAPT, we found that these are emerging, but they need to move beyond the pilot level interventions. Erika, if you can add the next part. So our recommendations for the VSS is that they should integrate better production practices into the VSS requirements, like agroforestry, and encourage landscape level initiatives. And lastly, for the private sector, they could join or co-finance landscape jurisdictional initiatives. With that, I conclude with the recommendations, but one last slide is that another main finding of our report is that we are moving towards a smart mix approach, bringing together a combination of measures to address the complex issue of deforestation. And this finding is really in line with our previous research on producing country measures to enhance forest conservation, which highlighted how there is no single policy measure that can enhance forest conservation and address deforestation alone. So in this line, no single actor or tool is sufficient to tackle the root causes of deforestation and increase the resilience of producers, communities, and supply chains. So we really need a combination of measures. And with this in mind, I give the floor to Rupal to open the panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Flor, and thank you everyone for listening very patiently. Once again, please feel free to read through the full report. We're dropping the link now again in the chat, and we're very happy at any point. If you have any questions, please write to us. But before further ado, let's move to a lot more interesting section of the webinar than you just hearing us speak. We have an interesting lineup of speakers here who bring in a wealth of knowledge from all sides. So we heard the smart mix. So we have policymakers, we have international business representatives, national business representatives, same international standards, but also the ones that are leading more regionally. So we are joined by virtually and not in real time via video by Catarina Vieira, who's one of the youngest members of European Parliament. Her work in the parliament focuses on international trade and human rights. Of course, she couldn't be with us in real time, but she has shared with us a video recording, which we shall play in a bit after we introduce everybody. We have Ricarda von Medding. She's a legal and policy officer at the European Commission, works with the DG Environment, so is very close on following the work and the updates on the EU deforestation-free regulation, or the EUDR, as we very popularly know it. We are then joined by Débora Diaz. She's the Senior Sustainability Manager at the Consumer Goods Forum, leads the work on the Forest Positive Coalition, currently 22 of the world's largest manufacturers and retailers, if I remember correctly, are a part of this coalition, including the likes of Tesco, Unilever, and IKEA. Very strongly supporting the gender balance of this panel. We also have Julia Ocampo. She's the Vice President of Cacao Sourcing and Sustainability at Lucre Chocolate, which is a Colombian B Corp certified chocolate manufacturer. Then we have our standards representatives. We have James Lael-Allotey, who's the Senior Manager for Standards and Assurance Design at Rainforest Alliance, followed by Peter Wayaki, who's the Conformity Assessment Coordinator at African Organization for Standardization, who's joining us from Kenya today on behalf of the Secretary General of ARSO. So thank you very much to everyone for joining us today. Before I start asking the questions that we have lined up, perhaps it's very nice for us to hear from Catarina. She very kindly shared with us a video intervention giving us a highlight of what the EUDR is up to, what is happening with the EUDR in terms of next steps, and what to look forward to the discussion this afternoon. So perhaps we can play that, Erica.
Dear all, let me start by thanking the International Institute for Sustainable Development for hosting this important discussion. I'm very grateful for the invitation, and I do apologize that my travel schedule didn't allow me to join you in real time today. We're having this discussion just days before the date when we expected the EUDR would come into force, following the one-year delay. As we all know, this groundbreaking piece of legislation aims to curb our imported deforestation and ramp up our efforts to protect biodiversity globally. This law should have been there not only for our climate goals, but also to support local communities and indigenous peoples, particularly outside the European Union. Under the explanation of unforeseen issues with its IT system, the European Commission proposed now yet another delay and effectively opened a Pandora's box. The growing appetite from center-right and far-right parties in the European Parliament to simplify all legislation, alongside with the pressure of external lobbying, effectively led to a renewed attempt to water down this important law. We're now expecting the final vote of the delay package to be voted upon next week in the Parliament's plenary session in Strasbourg. We expect another one-year delay in general and a delay until mid-2027 for small and micro operators. There's also an attempt to push for exemptions for small and micro primary producers in low-risk countries, such as foresters inside the EU. We also fear that there may be a weakening of the traceability by limiting due diligence statements to the first downstream operator or trader. And perhaps even more worrying, there is a push for a new review by 30th of April 2026, which would of course include even more simplification requests. The road to the EUDR has not been without bumps. Many companies and partner countries have raised legitimate concerns about compliance with the law. As lawmakers, our job must be to listen to those concerns and find solutions to effectively address them while keeping up the level of ambition of the law. In my view, however, the current deregulation of the EUDR is an example of terrible decision-making. In this process, we all lose. Our forests, our climate, the credibility of the EU decision-making process, but also the many companies and other stakeholders that have already made investments and prepared to enter into compliance with this law. We shouldn't forget that even countries that were once critical of the EUDR have already made significant progress in improving forest laws, raising awareness with producers, and setting up or scaling up traceability systems. They too have been caught by surprise by these last-minute changes. Our job as the EU should have been to focus on providing clarity and investing on systems that help stakeholders prepare for implementation, particularly in the Global South. Now, I know I might have painted a quite gloomy picture here, and I am indeed skeptical about the political climate in this mandate. But that being said, there's also a lot of positive things. It's reassuring to see how civil society remains committed to this piece of legislation and how numerous companies in relevant sectors continue to work hard to ensure that their supply chains are deforestation-free. It's also impressive to see that many governments across the world are putting in the work to protect their forests. The ICDD report shows an elevated role by private companies and by voluntary sustainability standards in boosting sustainable and resilient use of forest lands. It is evident that we cannot tackle deforestation challenges alone. I'm therefore very glad to see such wide range of participants in this seminar to discuss the next steps forward. And remember, you also have the responsibility to keep us, the policy makers, accountable. We need the civic space to support the initiatives that tackle deforestation. I thank you for your attention and wish you a very fruitful afternoon discussion.
Thank you very much to Catarina, and thank you very much to everyone for listening. A lot of food for thought, a lot of food for understanding and sinking in the facts that policies are shifting, especially on the EUDR. So I naturally will now move to you, Ricarda. I come to you with the question to follow on from what Catarina just shared. We understand the EUDR is delayed. We also understand there's implications that there might be further simplifications in the coming year, which can be expected. So the one question that we are left, and I'm sure our audience also would like to understand, is what is next for the EU in terms of implementation? How can the EU, or what's the EU envisioning as implementation steps, especially for those actors that have already started their compliance procedures or are in the process of this compliance procedures, the ones that are on the exporting side of things, perhaps from the Global South? So that's my question to you, Ricarda.
Thank you, Rupal, and hello, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I think we've come together from many different time zones. So I will try my best to answer your question, or maybe also multiple questions that you raised. First of all, let me start by thanking you for the invitation and for the super interesting introduction and overview over different aspects of tackling deforestation. And as Christina also mentioned in her introductory remarks, no measure alone can address all problems related to deforestation, but we really need this puzzle of different measures that come together. And therefore, as you rightly said, I work in the European Commission in DG Environment on the EU deforestation regulation, which is basically the regulatory approach towards tackling deforestation that is linked to EU consumption and EU production. So therefore, let me just provide a brief update from the Commission side on the EU deforestation regulation on the EUDR. So as MEP Vieira mentioned in her video message, the co-legislators a couple of days ago, less than a week ago, agreed to amendments to the EUDR. And this agreement is largely based on the proposal which had been put forward by the European Commission in October, so earlier this year. The agreement now achieves simplification, that is correct, and it also manages to reduce the load on our IT system. So that is the system where due diligence statements, declarations will be submitted. But at the same time, what is really important to highlight is that the aim was and is and will continue to be to uphold the objectives of the EUDR, so namely to address deforestation. Therefore, what the agreement now does is it does provide additional time, as you said. It also provides clarity and predictability to companies so that we can now ensure a smooth start, a smooth entry into application of the rules. So to go a bit more into the details of the very recent changes, I think it's first very important to stress that there are no new obligations that could affect stakeholders, especially in third countries. So primary producers in third countries that are not directly placing products on the EU market will continue not to have any legal obligations under the EUDR. So the EUDR always places the obligations on the first operator, the first company, person placing a product on the EU market. These producers will continue to provide the necessary information, such as geolocation and other data to customers which export to the EU market. The compromise that was agreed also introduces a number of other changes. So firstly, there is the additional time, as I mentioned, for all stakeholders, so within the EU and globally, with new dates for the entry into application. So there will be, in essence, one more year compared to the current EUDR. So this applies also for the additional transitional period for certain micro and small companies that can benefit from additional 6 months, meaning the entry into application will now be 30th December 2026 for medium and large companies and 30th June 2027 for micro and small. Secondly, the agreement also limits the creation of declarations and the passing on of reference numbers along the supply chain now to the first operator who places a product on the EU market, because deforestation usually happens at the core. It doesn't happen along the supply chain, but it happens where products are obtained from land. Therefore, also the downstream operators and traders, so companies further down the supply chain, no longer need to submit due diligence statements nor to pass on reference numbers in the supply chain. They ensure that traceability is kept by knowing who their supplier is and to whom they supply their products. Under the revised EUDR, there is also a newly created category, which is called the micro or small primary operators. And these are operators that are really primary producers established in countries designated as low risk and who place products directly on the EU market. And in order to reduce reporting requirements for such primary producers, they will be exempted from the need to submit due diligence statements, and instead they will need to file a simplified one-off declaration. In addition, the text introduces also a so-called simplification review clause by April 2026, on which we will now work hard to deliver. For this review clause, it is important to note that the Commission retains the right of initiative, and our aim is really to focus now fully on implementation of the law and ensuring the clarity and predictability that we see that stakeholders need and that we want to also provide for stakeholders. That being said, we will, of course, therefore continue to engage to provide clarity and to work with a pragmatic and solution-oriented approach. Just lastly, a last change that is now part of this revised EUDR is the removal of printed books, newspapers, and pictures from the EUDR product scope. These product groups were not in the initial EUDR proposal of the Commission from back in 2021, but they were added by the co-legislators later on. The co-legislators now suggested to remove these products again from the scope, and this was now agreed last week. Now, what are the next steps? The political agreement that was reached now needs to go through an adoption procedure in the Council, in the Parliament, to enshrine the agreed changes into the law by the end of this year. And with that, we will shift to implementation and ensuring that compliance can be achieved on the ground. And to ensure that the EUDR finally delivers by entering into application, we do see that it has already a lot of effects before entering into application. We hope to maintain this these positive developments that it has caused. But of course, you all, and I think all the initiatives that are presenting here today, also play a key role in working on implementation and working on moving forward with deforestation-free supply chains that we all need to ensure our livelihoods on this planet. Just very briefly mentioning how we also implement the EUDR internationally. For example, we will continue working very much with the dedicated Team Europe initiative on deforestation-free supply chains, which is a program that is financed and set up jointly with between the EU and multiple member states to support partner countries with technical implementation and really the implementation on the ground. And of course, we will also continue engaging in other dedicated fora, as, for example, the Sustainable Cocoa Initiative. And at technical level, where I'm here working on implementation, this is really one of the most important streams of our work. For example, last year we had close to 400 meetings on implementation, a lot of them in an international context. And I think the same is true for this year. And we will, of course, continue all these efforts in the run-up to the entry into application. So in short, we will not achieve the goal of tackling deforestation and forest degradation with EUDR alone, but we can only do so if we all join forces. With this, thank you very much. And I'm now looking forward to hear from the other panelists about their work on deforestation-free supply chains. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ricardo. Very, very informative. A lot of clarity on what's next for the EUDR. I'm sure the stakeholders appreciate that. And I very much appreciate the emphasis on, that there has been already a lot of positive impacts given the EUDR. Even though there have been delays, we know a lot of actors have already been working towards achieving deforestation-free supply chains. And one of the key ones, of course, are the private sector actors. And I say that with a hint of salt because I know we have Débora here with us, who is, of course, managing and leading a network of 22 of the largest retailers, manufacturers, if I'm right. And Débora, traceability, as also is EUDR star shining element, origin to plot of land, if is what it has been called, is, of course, one of the key factors we've seen in our research, you've read in the report, that is needed to prevent deforestation. But we've also seen at the same time, all these private sector actors, they have a lot of motivation to move towards that, given the regulations or just generally meeting deforestation-free goals. But there has still been challenges in doing that beyond tier 1 and tier 2 across the value chains. As Ricardo was also saying, deforestation happens towards the end, almost always not in all the levels of the supply chain. So my question to you is that, working with these big retailers, what one or two or multiple measures that you've seen that stand out to prevent deforestation, but also have traceability across the value chains?
Thanks, Rupal, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. First, I want to start by thanking the IISD for inviting me to present today, and of course, congratulate the team on the publication of the report. As Rupal introduced, I am here representing the Consumer Goods Forum, leading the Forest Positive Coalition. And for those who are not familiar with the Consumer Goods Forum, we're a CEO-led membership organization for the consumer goods industry. And the Forest Positive Coalition in particular brings together 22 of these companies, some of the world's largest retailers, manufacturers, as Rupal said. And our mission is to work collaboratively to drive, to remove deforestation, conversion, and forest degradation from commodity supply chains, specifically focusing on palm oil, soy, paper pulp, and fiber-based packaging, and beef. The approach of the coalition falls under 3 pillars. So we work towards forest-positive supply and suppliers as the first 2 pillars, and then supporting forest-positive landscapes as the third. And we've seen over the years, since the start of the coalition, back in 2020, and even before that different tools and approaches have been key to supporting the work under all 3 of these pillars, in addition to creating an environment that's conducive to better transparency and accountability. In terms of the tools that support building forest-positive supply chains, though compliance monitoring is still very critical for companies, especially when we're talking about upcoming legislation, and of course, EUDR being one of those regulatory tools. But not only that one, we have noticed that there has been a shift from looking at basic compliance monitoring to looking at proactive risk identification across the entire supply base. And you've heard of some of the tools that members have been using in some of the examples, such as Unilever and Mondelez. So companies are using tools and technology not just to identify risks, but also to improve traceability to origin. And this is being tackled at various levels and scales, heavily leveraging the technology to understand risks, but also opportunities. And this isn't limited just to supply chains. This has also been helping companies to understand where they should be focusing their efforts and resources in landscape engagement, which is a key part of our mission at the Forest Positive Coalition. We've also seen members rapidly adopting satellite monitoring for early issue detection. So in the Forest Positive Coalition, for example, we've worked on building a framework for monitoring and responding to issues identified using these tools in the palm oil supply base, which has helped companies understand how they can translate alerts into actionable responses. Because at the end of the day, the key thing is not just to use these tools to understand what is happening in supply chains and on the ground, but also to support deciding on what actions to take. And I couldn't go without talking about AI. I know everyone talks about AI these days, but in the use of some of these tools, we see that AI, even though it's a nascent technology, it's rapidly evolving and could be critical to help speeding up detection and allowing companies to prioritize action. In particular, in complex supply chains, which is something that has been particularly challenging for companies, especially as the availability of the data and the completeness of the data has been a roadblock to some of these approaches, and hopefully AI is something that could support with that. And I've talked about some of the challenges already, but one consistent hurdle that we've seen in the use of tools and technology is not necessarily the tools themselves, but data fragmentation and quality across the value chain, coupled with a proliferation of the different tools that makes, in particular, collaborative action challenging. Our approach is collaborative in nature, and as we've heard throughout the different presentations today, we cannot address the challenge of deforestation conversion alone. It's going to require all hands on deck, essentially. And while we're not all using the exact same systems, we should focus on some of the shared principles. Legislation is, of course, one way to approach this, but not the only one. But using shared principles and approaches should help us all move in the same or similar direction. And the issue of deforestation is immense, it's complex, and in particular, we've seen as the Forest Positive Coalition that individual and even collective supply chains can be limited in their approach because of small market shares. So we're hoping to see increased collaboration across the different sectors with different actors, not just the private sector, but also the public sector. Increasingly coming together to rapidly face these challenging issues. And I do need to caveat that these are only tools. Sometimes we have a tendency to focus a lot on the tools, in particular traceability being seen as a means to an end. But our view is that the tools can only take us so far, and we need to be mindful that we shouldn't reach for perfection in these approaches and tools. We need to focus from achieving perfect traceability or perfect systems of approaches to defining when these tools and the data and the issues that they raise, when the information is good enough to trigger a meaningful action, and that's something that's critically important for the private sector.
Thank you so much, Débora. Again, we keep coming back to data in whichever form we do a webinar on due diligence or deforestation, and is what we take also as mantra. I think data is the new commodity, so maybe it really is the new commodity, and we take note of that. And I heard you mentioned landscape approaches, which is also something we've read in our research that a lot of coalition members that you have, they have made commitments to these landscape approaches. And as you rightly said, these tools are one part of the solution, but not as a standalone, can perhaps not do so much. But what we've seen is that these approaches, these landscape approaches, where companies work together with themselves, with their peers, or with other local actors, has been very promising. And we think it's nice that as a nice learning factor, perhaps we would like to understand from you very briefly if there have been, some outstanding successful cases or what happens, why success happens, because these are also initiatives that take long to show up impacts. We've seen a lot of challenges in having, measurable impacts at landscape level. So if you have very few, very quick, some things that the audience can take away, this is what private sector should do when they want to think about doing a landscape and a holistic approach towards deforestation.
Thanks, Rupal. Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, the landscape approach is a critical pillar under the Forest Positive Coalition's work. And the reason we focus on landscapes is because we and our members recognize that supply chain approaches alone are insufficient to drive systemic change. Landscape engagement is an essential step to create a forest positive systemic impact on the ground. Companies often find themselves very far removed from issues on the ground and unable to address some of the root causes of deforestation conversion. For example, issues like governance and land tenure. And landscape approaches we find are necessary to create that jurisdictional level change for sustained supply of forest positive commodities. And our approach goes beyond just saving forests, and I think that's also critical for any landscape approach. There's a need to also integrate climate, nature, and people positive impacts, especially Indigenous people and Indigenous people and local communities. And this holistic approach is needed because these elements are all intrinsically tied together, and local actors need support and solutions that address the realities on the ground. A major success factor that we've seen has been the pooling of resources and influence by multiple companies, but not only limited to the private sector. We've worked with partners to build a portfolio of landscape initiatives. These are existing initiatives that members are individually and collaboratively investing in and supporting on the ground. This approach allows local implementers to focus on long-term, larger scale intervention rather than chasing small fragmented wins. Working directly with implementers also provides us with clear clarity on local realities, and enabling a better understanding of what are the risks and opportunities for change. I can't go without speaking to some of the challenges. One difficulty is to tie member supply chains to specific sourcing areas within a landscape. For many companies, the direct link is not necessary, but for a fair number, this is still an internal requirement and is important for getting company buy-in, which is where some of the tools we've heard about become critically important. Building scale is another challenge. These landscapes need sustained long-term investment and often large sums of money, and not having those things can be a roadblock to building that scale. So this requires mobilizing significant funding, and that can't only come from the private sector, and that can only come from companies like those who are part of the Forest Positive Coalition. So again, we understand quite the need to work with others and to partner with others to build that scale. So as part of the coalition, our work going forward isn't only going to focus on just the companies in the Forest Positive Coalition building this portfolio and supporting these initiatives, but bringing others along journey. And we know many are already on this journey. And it may be a question to an extent of connecting the dots. But for those who are not part of the journey, we do really encourage getting involved in landscape approaches. We feel it's really a way to create positive impact on the ground and create a sustained positive future for a lot of these communities. And as many have said, no single actor or tool is sufficient. It's going to take effort from many different actors at many different levels to reach the future that we're aiming for. And hopefully some of those future partners are here on the call today.
Thank you so much, Débora. I'm also sure there's a lot of information all of our audience has got, and a lot of us are excited about how we can contribute to these landscape approaches. But talking about working on the ground and positive effects on the ground, I'm also very happy to share that we have Julia here today from Colombia, who works with the Lucre chocolate. And Julia, we already heard a lot of due diligence expectations, a lot of buyer requirements, that shape market access for producers that are primarily exporting to these countries. My question to you, working with smallholders, with farmers, can you share with us what have been some key initiatives that have worked, especially for smallholders to protect forests, but also making sure they have market access? And of course, as was with Débora, what have been the challenges that you encountered in this process?
Okay, good morning. I say good morning because it's morning in Colombia. So thank you so much for the invitation. Just for those who doesn't know very good Lucre, I want to start introducing the company. So I work in Lucre Chocolate. This is a family company from Colombia. We are B Corp, so we do business for good. And the company was established 120 years ago. So we've been working with small farmers, small cocoa farmers for 120 years here in Colombia. And this is a value chain that is being built for so many years, building in the trust that we have in Colombia. So we are so focused in sustainability, and we've been working closely with the farmers. I think most of the support we do with the farmers is being close in a relationship so that we can understand their needs, and thinking that we are not an authority, we are more partners. So we focus on developing solutions together with the farmers, something like what you mentioned with the landscape approach. So I think that's a very key conclusion from this section, is that we have to work all together in landscape approaches. It's not enough just thinking about deforestation and bringing solutions to the farmers, but it's all working together also with the farmers, because the farmers are the community we work with, and we understand their reality, but we also engage them. And this is what I'm going to focus in my answer, is that we have to engage the farmers. It's not just being in the law or having the opportunity to export, but it's also understanding how we have to take care of our lands. And this is what we do with the Chocolate Dream. This is our sustainability plan that we work together in the communities. So we are located in Colombia, and we can go and work every day with our teams in the land. The first thing we have done in all these paths that I think has been really interesting, is more than just being in the law, is been working with the agroforestry systems, which is very important for the farmers. They have to get production, they have to be productive. And if we can improve this productive from the same land, they won't need to go and change more land and change the use of land. We have also explained them what it means to make a change of use of land. And with the polygons and everything, with the technology that we have in implemented in the lands with the Global Forest Watch and with all the satellites that we can monitor it every time, so we can react very fast and explain them why they have to take care of their lands and then how we can take care of it. In the meaning of how we can take care, we have different projects, from also engaging the community that is around, the local government. We also invest, and we have our clients in the whole value chain investing also in the projects. We bring all together to make projects like taking pictures of biodiversity. So this is, you can explain the farmers, they cannot cut the trees because they will get they will have a very loss in biodiversity, and they take pictures of this biodiversity so that they feel proud of it. We have platforms to share all this biodiversity. We also have different programs in taking care of the dry forest. Dry forest is very important in Colombia. We have lost 95% of our dry forest, and we have different programs bringing the farmers back to reforest and to have the ecosystem care, because it's not just a tree, it's more than that. It's what is behind, it's the soil, it's the ecosystem, it's the biodiversity, it's the community, it's the water, which is very important for the farmers. So finally, we went all the way to also have the carbon footprint from each farmer. And now we are sharing with each farmer how they can improve their practices, and this all with the sustainability standards that we have by ourselves, explaining them how they can do the best practices, taking care of their lands together with a good productivity so that they have good income, but also taking care of the whole ecosystem. We buy from around 15,000 farmers, so it's not an easy work. And Colombia, it's very large, and farmers are really isolated. They're not one next to the other one, but it's been a work that is being facilitated by the technology. I think before it was not possible. Technology has really facilitated all this work. We can monitor every time the farmers, we can understand what they are doing, we can teach them how to do the pruning so that it's not shown in the satellites as deforestation. And we have done, as you say, a very small pilot with blockchain. The idea was to know also to have the support from the farmers once that the transfer, or once that they sold the cacao. But it was very difficult because the farmers, they don't have internet access. So this we still expect we can go ahead and undertake this test in another ways, maybe now that we have, maybe in a future where we can have more cover of internet. But it's very important for us that the farmers, they can confirm everything, how they are paid, and the human rights that they are having at their farms, and also the free deforestation, because they are really aware that they have to take care of the environment. And so we want to work in this landscape approach all together, and we expect to continue working in this way, because it will be, is not just being proactive, but is going forward in this idea of being free deforestation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Julia. Very nice to hear. I think I take that message. And companies cannot afford to be reactive. They have to be proactive. And it is a whole ecosystem. Talking about the ecosystem, we have very important elements of this ecosystem here also, which are our voluntary sustainability standards. I give it to Christina to initiate that conversation.
Yeah. Excellent insight so far, and we have quite a bit of questions. So we're gonna engage at the moment with the two representatives of the standard setting bodies, Janina Carena, who is going to start with Janina Carena from Rainforest Alliance. She is senior standards developer, and she substitutes James Lael-Allotey, who has been traveling at the moment. So, Janina, a question to you. We have been talking in this conversation about geolocation mapping, and this is something that Rainforest Alliance has been working for a while on this. What specific strategies or partnerships, like based on your expertise, have proven to be most effective in implementing traceability systems to demonstrate deforestation-free production while using geolocation mapping?
Hi, good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation. As you say, I'm replacing James because he had an urgent meeting abroad, so he was not able to participate. Well, I mean, we as Rainforest Alliance don't have a specific partnership because we have our own GIS systems. Yeah, we have our own team who does this evaluation, this analysis. But in general, I mean, Rainforest Alliance has the certification program, but we also have the programs and landscapes that involves projects. So we try to work with those together. And we had, for instance, for West Africa, we have a cocoa fund that producers could utilize for if they needed like some support. Yeah, but I think something that we find like is relevant, and it was also requested by the Commission for UDR, is that for companies and members that are like involved in the supply chain to support farmers when possible in collecting this geodata. I mean, we haven't had that problem because, as I mentioned, and we have been doing for a while, and we have our own GIS team who does the analysis, and they can do it without needing to have like specific polygons. Now for UDR, we are requiring polygons, and they are doing this on this process. For the people that don't know, the products that we certify that are under the UDR regulation are coffee and cocoa. And coffee and cocoa are mostly produced by smallholder farmers. So there's a challenge there for smallholder farmers and these organizations that can have some thousand of farmers, you know, to collect this information. So it's taken a while, and producers are doing it. Let's say we can say that the only good thing from the bad thing of UDR being delayed is that farmers have more time to comply and to be able to collect this information. But in general, it's a challenge that they have, no? Especially in these very remote areas, they don't have good access to technology, and that might be a challenge. But in our case, we have been doing this analysis just with a location point. The GIS team can work with the images, with the satellite images, and do the analysis. But yes, for situations like UDR, there's more strict the requirement. You need to have polygons for hectares and above. So that is a challenge at the moment. But our farmers are being like slowly catching up and being validated against the UDR. And the other thing is that also with the latest update of our sustainable agriculture standard, we are getting also more strict on that. We are not only requiring geolocation points, but we are requiring like polygons of the certified area, but we are giving time to producers to do that. we are not expecting them to have it all at once, but we're giving like this year 35%, next year another 35%, and then hoping that by the third year they can reach the 100%. But it is a challenge, that we have there. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you very much. Well, I think the support to farmers remains relevant so that they can actually conduct the allocation mapping correctly. So I think this is an important takeaway of your intervention. For the sake of time, we're going to go now to Peter, who is the representative of our ARSO, which is a regional public standard from the Global South. I've been working closely for the past year. So, Peter, what is the role of public sustainability standards in Africa in supporting producers to adopt best practices that address deforestation while ensuring they can comply with international market access requirements? We need to understand that ARSO operates largely in Africa, but they have also a motivation to be part and operate in other beyond Africa. So, Peter, please.
Thank you very much, Christina, and thank you to ISD for such an invitation to be part of an important discussion. And of course, delving into your question on how we can advance deforestation-free value chains through public sustainability standards, we allow me to focus more on ECOMAC Africa standards, which is ARSO's Continental Sustainability Certification Scheme. And we are going to look into three broad perspectives on how we can leverage all this into the entry into an external market. And for ECOMAC certification, is of importance to note is that it's a set of sustainability standards that addresses African production realities. And this is, of course, through the tailored discussions that we have in technical committees. And needless to say, this is also benchmarked against international expectations. What this means, of course, is when a producer is in alignment or comply to an African sustainability standards, then they are simultaneously strengthening their alignment with the global market requirements. This is including the EUDR, which is perhaps one of the biggest discussion points in this webinar. And this way, the ECOMAC standards are serving as a continental bridge to reduce that compliance burden for African producers, especially the smallholders, who often face issues on high certification schemes, certification costs, of course, that align with the international requirements. Secondly, is that having such public standards means we are able to build what we call a domestic capability. This domestic capability means that we are able to bring or synergize the activities of both national standards bodies, of course, with the help of accreditation bodies who are keeping in check in terms of assessment of the certification bodies. And this creates a local audit capacity where we are able to use the local resources to, of course, facilitate certification. And this is also coupled with what we have as producer training in sustainable land use, as well as integrating traceability aspects into national systems through the adopted international continental standards. This will in turn shift what we have as producers from being reactive in terms of the compliance to proactive and environmental stewardship altogether. Finally, by having international or public sustainability standards, we are able to have a regionally recognized and endorsed mark, which is ECOMAC Africa. And this level of credibility and neutrality is going to help support market acceptance through incorporation into various aspects such as the AFCFTA, which we have been looking towards implementation. Once we have that threefold criteria, then I believe that we will be able to spearhead the adoption of public sustainability standards into this value chain as part of the smart mix. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter, for a very insightful answer. Indeed, it provides a lot of support for farmers to comply, as well as the being a public standard. It gives the institutionality for African farmers to adopt better production practices and potentially access markets. Excellent. So we have had a very insightful conversation. I would like to say that there is few remarks, very rich, that every panelist mentioned. I think there is a clear emphasis on supporting implementation. There is a clear emphasis on collaboration of various actors. And there is a clear emphasis on landscape approaches, territorial approaches that considers the farmers' needs. I think it's very, very interesting. We have a very dynamic Q&A chat. So I'm going to ask a couple of questions, sorry, for the sake of time, and then we can close with a round of key takeaway from each panelist. So a question for Ricarda. Excuse me. How do you address the question of fairness and equity raised by like-minded countries of Global South on one-size-fits-all concept of EUDR? Ricarda, please.
Thank you, Christina. No, I think so. On the EUDR, it is important to highlight that it is designed to apply in an even-handed and non-discriminatory manner, in line with our commitments under the WTO regime, for example. And the EUDR is most of all designed to also comply with the EU's international commitments to halt and reverse forest loss and forest degradation by 2030. And therefore, looking at also climate principles, of course, I think we all agree here that taking action against deforestation is crucial for tackling climate change, because deforestation is actually one of the largest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions and consequentially to climate change. And therefore, the EUDR really has this aim of ensuring that the products that are sold on the EU market, so these products or exported from the EU, are produced in a deforestation-free manner. Therefore, we see the EUDR not only as imposing obligations, but it is also really an opportunity to engage in dialogues on how to proactively make supply chains deforestation-free and enhance their traceability and transparency, and therefore to also boost opportunities for actors around the globe to support sustainable forest management and protect our valuable ecosystems. On ensuring that the implementation works around the globe, I already mentioned before that we have a lot of exchanges with our partner countries around the globe. And we have significantly increased also the funding in technical support to ensure deforestation-free supply chains, for example, through this Team Europe initiative and through value chain specific initiatives. And we really see that the EUDR is triggering a lot of change as regards traceability and traceable supply chains. Even before its entry into application, we have had a number of traceability initiatives present at our expert group meetings, for example, and we have also had smallholders associations, including from the Global South, present on the benefits that they personally also see from having a visible role in the supply chain, where they're not an anonymous provider of goods, but they have this role, and the more this role is visible, the more they can also ensure that their rights are ensured in supply chains. So therefore, I think it is always worth highlighting that ultimately the obligations, they remain with the importer of goods. So there are no obligations on third country producers if they're not placing directly on the EU market. And we're doing everything in our capability to support the implementation of EUDR around the globe.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ricarda. I think my colleague Rupal will formulate a question that we have in the Q&A chat for Julia.
Thank you so much, Ricarda. Julia, very quickly, because I see we're approaching towards the end of this, but I see a very important question because we talked about landscapes and landscape approaches and that it's very important that everybody works together to get those. The question that is in the chat for you is what has been your experience with buyers co-financing the implementation of such landscape interventions? Very briefly, in 30 seconds.
Wow, difficult in 30 seconds. But anyways, we have some experience in the south of the country, in Huila, working with a landscape approach. And it's been a successful example working with the dry forest and taking care of the dry forest. We work together with the government, with IDH also from Holland, and some other institutions from the foundations in Colombia. And we've been working with a group of cocoa farmers, and it really, I think it's really the good approach. It's all together working in the same way to have deforestation free and also the community getting out income and a way of living, a good way of living with this approach.
Thank you so much, Julia. I see we have also somewhat biased representation. So, Débora, please.
Yeah, sorry to interject. I wanted to also share our experience from the Consumer Goods Forum. So we have our work on landscape initiatives, and one of the big projects that we've taken working with the Soft Commodities Forum, which is a consortium of the major soy traders, the ADMs, Bunge's, Cargills, etc., of the world, is something called the Sustainable Landscape Initiative, which is bringing together our members and the Soft Commodities Forum members to support landscape initiatives in Mato Grosso, Western Mato Grosso in Brazil. And a really positive aspect of this is that sometimes when it comes to engaging suppliers and traders, it's sometimes hard to make that connection across the supply chain. But this is sort of a foot in the door to working on shared challenges and shared areas of interest and hotspots that can also help to build that relationship with suppliers and build up towards more collaboration in the future.
Okay, thank you so much, Débora. I absolutely appreciate the Sustainable Landscapes Initiative. And I know it's holiday season, very difficult to hold audience. So I will just take one last round of closing from everybody in maximum 3 words. What is your takeaway from now to the next year, to the new year, perhaps? What's that you take away from this webinar? I will start with ARSO, and then we go to Rainforest, then we go to the others. So Peter, very quickly, in 3 words maximum, what do you take away from today? Yeah.
Thank you, Rupal. I believe that, as you mentioned, there's the issue of the smart mix, traceability, as well as incorporation of technology as we move towards a harmonized standards. I believe that's my takeaway from this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. Then we go to Janina.
Thank you, Rupal. Yeah, I mean, definitely the approach is the conclusion you got from your report is the way. We cannot work in isolation. There's the need to have this mix of the different approaches to tackle this challenge. And what Rainforest Alliance is doing is that we've launched now our regenerative agriculture standard to support more on the side of regeneration and to go beyond sustainability. And we also have our other side, that is the programs side that work on the landscapes approaches. And we have selected some countries and landscapes as a priority to work on that area, and that is kind of like complementary. You know, we work on these landscape approaches together with our company partners and conservation organizations to try to reach that goal.
Thank you so much. I look forward to reading the standards. Then we go to Julia. Again, I'm sorry,
Yes.
again, I come back with 30 seconds, 3 words, but this is the last.
Okay, yeah, so I keep that we have to keep working on landscape approach, thinking in agroforestry, biodiversity, and regenerative practices.
Okay, super. Thank you very much. Very, very succinct and very apt. Débora?
Yeah, in 3 words, let's work together. If anything I've said today resonates, or the challenges or similar challenges to what you're facing, come and talk to us. So you never know when collaboration will be possible if you don't reach out. So yeah.
Thank you so much. And we close with Ricarda, your 3 keywords.
Thank you. Maybe my 3 keywords would be communication and mutual reinforcement. So it was really interesting to hear all these updates from the other participants today. And we're really happy to continue working together to make deforestation-free supply chains a reality. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. Christina, do you also want to thank everyone before we close very quickly?
Yeah, very thank you, everyone, every panelist. I think there is a wealth of experience that advance, I think, in the right direction. I think is that my main takeaway: collaboration and landscape approaches and farmers at the center. And thank you for the audience. We had close to 200 registers, so bear in mind that the recording will reach all the registered participants that came, and I'm sure they will listen to it, and we will continue working on this. Thank you for staying 3 minutes more, and all the best to everyone.
Thank you.
And thank you. Good progress with all the initiatives that were presented here, from regulation to corporate and standards. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice rest of the
Thank you,
year.
everyone.
Bye.
Take
Bye.
care.